in the UK, the British Prime Minister Rishi Sunak has now fired the Home Secretary, Suella Braverman, after she claimed that marches in support of Palestinians in Gaza were hate marches. She also claimed the police had played favourites in policing marches by people supporting Palestine and people supporting Israel. In the UK, the Home Secretary is the person in charge of the police. In London, those police officers are controlled by a commissioner. He's often appointed by the Home Secretary. Musa Mdunge is a political analyst based at the University of Dundee in the UK. Musa, good afternoon to you. Good to see you again. Suella Braverman, a long history of people like controversial statements. The position of Home Secretary, one of the most difficult in British politics, like the position of Home Affairs here. What line did she finally cross?
Thank you so much, Stephen, for having me. Good afternoon to you and to your viewers. So, yes, Suella Braverman has been really quite a legend in the conservative story of the past 13 years. But fundamentally, the line that she really did cross was the aspersions that she placed on poor people, blaming them for their role in being poor, essentially. And fundamentally, she crossed a line, and one that the Conservative Party have been for quite some time trying to work to change that image, to not be seen as a party simply for the elites, the bourgeoisie, and also a party that can appeal to the broader public, to the working class. And if you look at the kind of work that David Cameron did, and even Boris Johnson, and even certainly this Prime Minister when he was Chancellor of the Exchequer, there was certainly a push towards the social policies of the Labour Party, towards cleansing the Conservative Party, and essentially branding the Conservative Party as compassionate conservatives, in the same ilk as we found under George W. Bush in the United States in the 2000s.
And I mean, there are big differences in the conservatism of someone like George W. Bush and Donald Trump. Are we seeing the same in the UK? I mean, she's someone who likes to take on people she describes, she means this disparagingly, people she describes as woke. It has many other meanings. Most people don't agree with her meaning of it. I mean, she's a class warrior, to put it another way.
Indeed. I mean, what we're seeing happening in the Conservative Party in the UK is exactly that we have been witnessing happening in the United States, over the past 10 years. There's certainly a move towards the right, and especially towards the extreme of that right in terms of ideology for the Conservative Party. Remember that this is a party that is in many ways, when you look at its membership, out of step and out of touch with the British society as it stands today, with a majority of its membership old white men who are still holding on to ideas of Great Britannia. And it's simply not going to hold in this day and age. And so people like Suella Braverman challenge the identity of the Conservative Party, how it seeks to position itself in the future, and given the questions that the country is yet to answer on its future in terms of its relationship with Europe, in terms of its relationship with the United States, and even now with China and other leading emerging economies, the likes of Suella Braverman will become very critical in really driving the battle for the soul of the Conservative Party and at large the United Kingdom.
Musa, this is also one of these sort of strange questions, but we have to ask. We expect a British election next year. Everyone expects the Conservative Party to lose. They expect Labour to win. And Sir Keir Starmer, former Chief Prosecutor of all things, to actually become the new Prime Minister of Britain, which would almost automatically, in British politics, there's a tradition, if you lose an election, you resign as the political leader. You would expect Rishi Sunak to resign. Would then she try and contest for the position of leader of the Conservative Party?
Indeed. Look, I mean, those are the calculations that are happening in number 10 Downing Street and in other places around London and Westminster. She is possibly one of the contenders who will likely pick up her hand in line to succeed Rishi Sunak as leader of the Conservative Party and really reclaim the ideological battle and stance of the party. But she also faces competition in the likes of Liz Truss. We've been hearing Liz Truss making a noise after a year since the fall of her government, and almost, trying to rewrite history and paint her legacy in a new light. And so Rishi Sunak faces a lot of challenges, notwithstanding the biggest boogeyman in his closet, which is Boris Johnson, whom, though out of parliament, remains to be a figure almost in the likening of Jacob Zuma when you think about ANC politics and South African politics. So certainly the Prime Minister is under pressure next year with the elections, and you see it with the moves that he has just made. Appointing the former Prime Minister, David Cameron, as his new Foreign Secretary is a huge move, and one in which we see Rishi Sunak trying to realign his brand and connect it with David Cameron and the kind of conservatism he was pushing then. But at the same time, he's a prime minister who's definitely thinking about next year. And with foreign policy being one of the areas which have been his strengths, it's critical for him to hound in on that while he still tries to answer the difficult questions around things like immigration, which are a hot-button issue for the people in the United Kingdom.
David Cameron's a fascinating politician. I mean, it's not something that really has happened here, maybe sort of once, where someone who's been in the top job actually comes to a job below that. Is this some sort of comeback for him? And I mean, he's the typical Tory, went to Eton, the whole bit.
Indeed. I mean, look, David Cameron, a lot has been written about the end of his premiership. After 6 years in power, many believe that he need not have lost his power due to the European Union. But unfortunately, Brexit, ended his career. And so, like many other of his countrymen and fellow party members, who have occupied number 10 Downing Street, Europe has often been the cause of their fall. And so answering the question around the European Union and around UK's position in the world is going to be very, very critical. And he comes in a very critical moment right now where Anglo-American dominance of global affairs is being hugely challenged in areas such as the Middle East, where we see the Israeli-Hamas conflict happening currently, in the war in Ukraine, which has been waged by the Russians, as well as, the challenge that is being posed by emerging markets such as China, Brazil, and India. The United Kingdom certainly has a lot of questions to answer around its value proposition, both to Washington, D.C., but also to Brussels. And that's going to be the key balancing line for the United Kingdom. And David Cameron is certainly the kind of person who can have an impact in that role in the same way that you would find a Tony Blair, but notwithstanding the controversies around David Cameron's own legacy in foreign policy. I need not remind you about Libya and, what a mess that turned out to be, and one that the African continent and the Libyan people especially are still paying for.
If you're Rishi Sunak and you want to tame Boris Johnson, well, you might as well look to someone who was at school at the same time as him in the same class. I mean, we think we have a small elite. Britain has a very small elite sometimes, Musa. There's another issue here which I find fascinating, which is politics around the world has changed dramatically in the last sort of 20 years, but some of the patterns repeat. And we saw for a time in the UK, during the Jeremy Corbyn era, the Labour Party kind of went to the extremes of British politics. Of course, he would deny that, but it sort of did. We might find the Conservatives lose power next year. Braverman and others drag the Conservative Party to the right of British politics. It's fascinating how politics sometimes rhymes with the past.
Indeed, indeed. This is the challenge that the country is finding itself right now, is both parties have had a history, and of course the Conservative Party is currently battling that ideological battle of reclaiming former positions, and you see the likes of Margaret Thatcher often being invoked when conversations around the kind of role the United Kingdom ought to play today, happen, as well as the stance on issues around immigration, economic policy, and so certainly the likes of Liz Truss, the likes of Suella Braverman are going to be quite critical and consequential in shaping where the Conservative Party go. Now, whether the Conservative Party becomes a party of irrelevance, almost in the same risk that is shared by its counterbalance in the United States in the form of the Republican Party, is one that is still yet to be seen. What we know currently right now is you have a prime minister who's really just battling to breathe at this particular point, who hasn't really set up a value proposition for why he can lead Britain and what vision he's trying to lead the United Kingdom to. And thirdly, rather than spending time on governance, will be often distracted with intra-political party issues, in the same liking as our own President Cyril Ramaphosa finds himself, and how we can justify the wasted 6 years of his time in power has been that toss-up between the Republic and the party. And sadly, we've often seen the party win and triumph over the country.
Shots fired. Mr. Mdunge, thank you very much indeed.